It started as an ordinary red carpet interview, the kind that Hollywood churns out by the dozen. Flashing lights, laughter, rehearsed compliments. But then Dakota Johnson leaned toward the microphone, smiled that effortless smile, and said the sentence that would ignite every corner of the internet. "I've always had a crush on Sam Heughan." The crowd around her laughed, thinking it was just a harmless joke. The interviewer chuckled, moved on to another question, and the moment seemed to pass. But within minutes, that one line was everywhere, cut into clips, looped on social media, replayed in slow motion with captions like, "Did she really say that?" and "What about Jamie Dornan?" By the end of the night, Dakota Johnson and Sam Heughan were trending worldwide. Fans of both actors filled timelines with memes, theories, and emotional breakdowns. But the loudest noise came from another corner, the 50 Shades fandom, the people who had spent years romanticizing the electric chemistry between Dakota and Jamie Dornan. And somewhere, far from the red carpet, Jamie heard those words. He had been in London that evening, attending a small private event for a charity he supports. A journalist approached him during a break and asked, almost casually, "Jamie, did you hear Dakota's confession about Sam Heughan?" Jamie froze. The room seemed to quiet. He forced a polite smile. "No," he said lightly, "but I'm sure it was all in good fun." The reporter laughed and walked away. But those words, "a crush on Sam Heughan," kept replaying in his head like an echo he couldn't escape. He knew Sam. They'd met at several industry events, even joked about being constantly compared. Two actors from the UK and Ireland, both tall, charming, both adored by fans. There was mutual respect, nothing more. But hearing Dakota say it publicly felt strange. Not because of jealousy, but because of the history between them. Jamie had spent years trying to distance himself from the shadow of 50 Shades of Grey, and from the idea that he and Dakota were more than co-stars. But deep down, there had always been a connection, a quiet understanding forged through years of filming scenes that blurred the line between fiction and reality. They'd supported each other through awkward interviews, harsh reviews, and endless speculation. There had been trust there, something delicate, unspoken, and fragile. So when Dakota's confession went viral, it hit harder than expected. The media turned the story into a spectacle overnight. "Dakota chooses Sam over Jamie," screamed the headlines. "The woman who once had Hollywood's Mr. Grey now has a new fantasy." Talk shows dissected her statement like it was a public breakup. Fans tagged Jamie in every post, waiting for a reaction. At first, Jamie stayed silent. But people around him noticed the shift. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The way he avoided questions about Dakota in interviews that followed. One source described him as visibly distracted, almost restless. Inside, Jamie wasn't angry, he was unsettled. For years, he had carried the weight of assumptions about his bond with Dakota. Even when he insisted it was professional, fans refused to believe him. And now, hearing her gush about another man, publicly, so easily, made him realize just how much of that past he hadn't fully let go of. Amelia Warner, his wife, tried to comfort him, brushing off the headlines. "It's harmless," she said gently. "Everyone says things like that on camera." Jamie nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere, not on jealousy, but on the strange ache of being replaced in a story he never meant to start. Meanwhile, Sam Heughan himself tried to calm the chaos. During a live interview, he laughed off Dakota's confession. "She's lovely," he said, "but I think her fans might be more in love with the idea than I am." It was a polite deflection, but the damage was done. The story had already taken on a life of its own. Back in London, Jamie avoided his phone for the rest of the night. But the next morning, every headline screamed his name. Jamie Dornan's reaction to Dakota's confession. Photos of him looking tense at the charity event were plastered across tabloids, framed as heartbreak. A friend later revealed that Jamie barely slept that night. He wasn't angry with Dakota, but he couldn't stop wondering why it bothered him so much. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe it was pride, or maybe it was something he couldn't name, a reminder that once, There had been a connection the world saw too clearly, and now, he was just a shadow in her story. As one insider put it, he didn't expect it to hurt. But it did. The confession that had seemed playful to everyone else had reopened something Jamie thought he'd long buried, the part of him that still cared a little too much. And as the world laughed, reposted, and speculated, Jamie Dornan, the man who'd spent years mastering calmness under pressure, suddenly found himself caught in emotions he thought he'd left behind. The internet didn't calm down, it exploded. Every entertainment outlet ran with the same headline: Jamie Dornan heartbroken after Dakota Johnson's love confession for Sam Heughan. Some claimed to have exclusive sources saying Jamie had called Dakota in private. Others speculated Amelia Warner was furious. None of it was confirmed, but that didn't matter. The story had already taken on a life of its own. For Jamie, the hardest part wasn't the rumors, it was how real they started to feel. The more people repeated the narrative, the harder it became to separate truth from fiction. He kept seeing clips of Dakota's smiling face, the playful sparkle in her eyes as she said Sam's name, and every time it hit him the same way: sharp, unexpected, and unreasonably painful. He didn't understand it. He wasn't supposed to feel this way anymore. That chapter, the one where he and Dakota were tangled up in fan fantasies and endless headlines, was supposed to be closed. He had a wife, a family, and a life far away from that noise. But emotions don't care about logic, and Jamie found himself reliving moments he'd buried years ago. Moments on set when Dakota would laugh at something he said, or the quiet trust they shared in between takes, when the whole world disappeared and it was just them, breathing the same scene. When he finally spoke about it, privately, to a friend, his words were simple: "It's strange. I don't want her, but I don't want anyone else to have her either." That was the truth behind his silence. It wasn't jealousy, it was the ghost of connection, the ache of something once so powerful that even years later, it still found a way to sting. Meanwhile, Dakota's world had become chaotic too. The interview had been playful, spontaneous. She had mentioned Sam Heughan in passing, half-jokingly, during a light-hearted question about celebrity crushes. She hadn't imagined the reaction it would cause. "I didn't think people would take it that seriously," she told a friend later. It was supposed to be a laugh. But when the story blew up, she realized the damage was already done, not just to her image, but to someone she deeply respected. Jamie's fans were divided. Some attacked Dakota for humiliating him. Others accused the media of twisting her words. A few even dragged Sam Heughan into the crossfire, forcing him to clarify that he and Dakota were just friends. But the storm didn't stop. For days, Dakota avoided interviews altogether, quietly retreating from the spotlight. Behind the scenes, she texted Jamie a simple message: "I'm sorry this turned into something it shouldn't have." He didn't reply immediately, not because he was angry, but because he didn't know what to say. There were too many emotions tangled up in that single sentence: gratitude, hurt, nostalgia, confusion. When he finally answered hours later, his words were short but honest. "It's okay. It just caught me off guard." Those 8 words carried years of unsaid history. For a long time, that was how their bond had worked, never needing explanations, just fragments of truth passed quietly between them. But the public didn't let go. Every time Jamie appeared in public, reporters asked about Dakota. When he attended an awards show, a journalist shouted from across the carpet, "Jamie, have you talked to Sam yet?" He laughed it off, but his eyes tightened, that same flash of discomfort he couldn't hide. It reached a breaking point when one outlet published a story titled, "Jamie Dornan Can't Move On." They used photos of him looking tired, solemn, pensive, painting the image of a man haunted by lost love. For the first time, Jamie addressed it head-on. During a sit-down interview for a new film, the host hesitantly brought up the viral confession. Jamie took a deep breath and smiled softly. "Dakota is one of my favorite people in the world," he said. "We've shared experiences most actors never get to have. I'll always be protective of her. But sometimes people turn friendship into something it isn't. It was calm, mature, but the way his voice cracked at the end said everything. That interview changed the narrative again. Fans began to soften, realizing that the story wasn't about jealousy or betrayal. It was about two people who had once carried the weight of an illusion too heavy for anyone to understand. Days later, Dakota appeared at a press conference and, when asked about Jamie's comments, smiled and said, "He's always been a gentleman. Always." The internet finally exhaled. For once, it wasn't drama that people talked about, it was grace. For Jamie, the storm eventually faded. But that night, alone at home, he rewatched one of the old 50 Shades interviews. In it, he and Dakota were laughing uncontrollably, teasing each other, completely unguarded. For the first time in a long time, he smiled genuinely. Not from longing, not from regret, but from gratitude. Because sometimes, a connection doesn't have to last forever to matter. It just has to be real while it exists. And as he turned off the screen, Jamie whispered to himself, almost amused, almost sad, "Maybe I'll never really stay calm when it comes to her."